They find a guy with his jaw torn off, his guts ripped out, and his heart eaten. Who could have done such a thing? A wild man. It's said the wide open spaces can drive a man crazy, and being alone in the wilderness can certainly exacerbate any mental weakness or illness. So why should the Mojave be any different? Ever since recorded time, humankind has had to deal with individuals who are different. And religious or cultural choices aside, often many of the afflicted have suffered from various mental disturbances. To put it coarsely in the language of the Old West, they simply done gone crazy. And it's in the newspapers of the Old West and the last century that we see the emergence of a character termed the wild man. Now, this is not the common slang also given to hairy hominid or Bigfoot type creatures reported in the deserts or wooded mountains, but actually wild men, humans who have left society to live as animals in the wilderness. Some lonely and sad, some bizarre and freakish, and some exceptionally violent and dangerous. In 1901, this article appeared in the Southern California newspapers about the hunt for a wild man being encountered up in Shasta. Described as an older man, naked except for a battered derby, he was said to run through the bushes screaming, "I want 51, number 51," and to be of exceptional strength and agility. The authorities thought him an escape from a local asylum and would probably die of exposure if not captured before too long. Moving to 1910, this article told of a scientist from San Bernardino who was traveling to the area, compromising the southern Mojave and Mexican border, in search of a wild man who had been terrorizing ranchers and miners. Said to be completely naked and armed with a shotgun, the man was thought to be a former miner who had lost his fortune and his mine. But apparently, the man had kept enough of his wits to tell one prospector he was, quote, done with civilization and never coming back. What eventually became of the man is unknown. 1914 brought us this report of a, quote, wild man on raid for food terrorizes women and children. Apparently, a crazed hermit who lived in the aptly named Devil's Canyon area of the Mojave would forage for food by raiding outlying ranches and mining camps. He was never caught. But finally, in 1917, a wild man was captured, smack dab in the middle of the Mojave. Officers from Ludlow had reports of an elderly man roaming the lava beds out in the desert. They laid a trap for him, the article not saying what it was, and they captured him. He was brought to the San Bernardino jail in chains. And what crime was he charged with? The paper said the wild man was, quote, charged with the crime of being insane. So much for an enlightened attitude. Now, I could show you article after article of these sad and abandoned people, but for the most part, they weren't dangerous, just disturbed. Although, a naked guy with a shotgun might bear watching. Now, this next encounter is something else altogether. This story comes from way back in 1886 and was reported in the Los Angeles Harald. Although, there is some confusion as to whether the story happened in California or Kansas, as it was also reported in the Kansas City Journal as pertaining to that state. In any event, two men, both old friends, had left a church meeting together one night, deciding to walk home in the dark. When they hadn't arrived the next morning, the family of one man went searching and out in the wilderness came upon a most gruesome scene. They found their friend, a man named Samuel Gordon, dead upon the ground. His lower jaw cut off, his heart, lungs, and liver torn out, and body fearfully mutilated. But the real shocker was that sitting there next to him was the other man, an individual named Rhodes Clement, and he was calmly eating the man's raw heart. To add to the horror, the man's dog was sitting alongside, covered with blood and licking the entrails. So what was the wild man angle? Well, apparently, both men had occasionally taken to the hills, either alone or together, and lived like wild men, avoiding people and trying to evade capture by the police. Although for what crime, I've not been able to find out. The article says the most shocking aspect of the crime was the fact that the murderer had no knife or sharp weapon with him. He had mutilated and cannibalized his comrade's body with nothing more than his bare hands and teeth. Although police theorized the dog might have helped, they weren't sure. Unsurprisingly, they put it down to the man being, quote, crazy. Now, it might surprise you to learn that being crazy might just get you off in the Old West, the same then as today. This article from 1913 tells of a killer let off on a plea of, quote, desert madness, a condition that apparently can affect you if out in the desert for too long. The judge thought so, and from the tone of these various wild man articles, many others did too. But was desert madness real? Now, I think the most fascinating part of this article is how the two guys seemed to live in society normally, but then would take to the hills and live as wild men for months on end. And apparently it came to the notice of the police because the article did say the police were looking for him. Although, as I stated, I couldn't find what exactly the charge was. Although in those times, mental illness was not treated as an illness, it was treated as something to be persecuted or jailed for, as the one article stated that the man had been charged with the crime of being insane, which in itself is insane. Now, can you still find wild men in the Mojave? Well, I got a story for you. About 5 years ago, I was coming home from Death Valley with a buddy of mine. We had been out for about 5 days, and we were burnt, cooked. And we were coming home one night. It was like a 9.5-hour drive just to get out of where we were. And we were coming down through the Mojave Preserve into the town of Amboy, or the ghost town of Amboy, which some of my viewers know Amboy, and you know what a crazy place it is. And I was on this one little stretch of road. We were driving along. It was about 3 in the morning, and we hadn't been talking because we were just totally burned out and tired. And I happened to look down the road, and I see this figure, walking along, marching this weird gait out in the desert. And as he came into the lights, he looked like someone had wrapped him in rags, like making a mummy. And then he had slept in a mud puddle all night and then dried off because he was just caked with dirt. Hair out to here, huge beard. And he didn't look at us, which is weird. When someone needs help in the desert, usually they'll come towards you or try and flag you down. And this guy was just walking out along the road, side of the road. And, he comes by and all of a sudden it's like, choom, goes right by. And it was one of those things where it's so late, I was so tired. I just looked at my friend to see if he had seen it or him. And he looked over at me and goes, did I just see the Yucca Man? And I was like, yeah, I guess. And we just kept going. Now, normally we would have turned around and see if the guy needed help, but it was so late at night, we were so burnt, and he looked so crazy, I don't know what we could have done. So yes, next time you're in the Mojave camping at night, you might keep an eye open for a wild man. I'm ML Behrman. I'll see you next time.